Do you think the Pied Piper is just a children's fairy tale? A simple morality story about paying one's debts? What if I told you that buried beneath centuries of sanitized retellings lies a horrifying truth that authorities have systematically erased from official records? The story you think you know, a colorful piper leading rats away from a medieval town, then stealing children when denied payment, is merely the sugar-coated version designed to obscure a phenomenon that stretches back far longer than recorded history. A phenomenon that continues today. The earliest documented incident we recognize as connected to the Pied Piper occurred in the German town of Hamelin in 1284. This date appears in the town's own chronicles, stating simply, "It is 100 years since our children left." No explanation, no elaboration, just a cryptic entry marking an inexplicable tragedy. But the municipal records from this period contain something that modern retellings conveniently omit. The Hamelin Town Register of 1384, exactly 100 years after the initial event, contains an account written by town clerk Friedrich Meinhardt, describing how 130 children vanished after following a stranger dressed in many-colored garments who played unearthly music. Meinhardt's account specifically notes that the town council had been warned 3 days prior by an elderly woman who claimed to have witnessed an identical event in her youth in a village some 60 miles away. The council dismissed her as delusional. They were wrong. A stained glass window installed in Hamlin's Market Church in 1300, now conveniently destroyed during World War II, depicted children in white clothing following a tall, thin figure into a hillside. The inscription, translated from Middle Low German, read, "In the year of our Lord 1284, by a piper, dressed in all kinds of colors, 130 children born in Hamelin were seduced and lost at the place of execution near the Koppen." The place of execution. Not a mountain, not a magical realm, a place of death. Archaeological excavations conducted near Hamelin in 1957 by Dr. Heinrich Völker uncovered a mass grave dating to the late 13th century, containing the remains of approximately 130 children between the ages of 4 and 14. The German government classified the findings under national security protocols, and Dr. Völker died in a house fire 3 weeks later. All his research materials were destroyed. The official explanation: faulty wiring. His assistant, Marguerite Weber, attempted to publish their findings in an academic journal, but disappeared while traveling to meet with an editor in Munich. She was never found. What's particularly disturbing is that the skeletal remains showed no signs of violence, no broken bones, no weapon marks, just 130 children who apparently laid down and died, together, at the same time. The toxicology reports, leaked briefly before being classified, indicated no known poison in the preserved tissue samples. But they did find something else: abnormal ossification patterns in the inner ear consistent with exposure to extreme sonic frequencies. But Hamelin was not the first incident, nor would it be the last. Records from the monastery at Fulda describe a similar event in 1167 when 88 children from the village of Erfurt followed a strange minstrel with eyes like bottomless wells, and were never seen again. The account, written by Brother Dietrich, describes how the children appeared to be in a trance, walking as if in deep slumber, yet their eyes remained open. In 1376, just 92 years after Hamelin, the village of Szczecin on the Baltic coast lost 57 children in a single night. Witnesses described a tall figure playing a wooden instrument that made no sound adults could hear. Yet the children responded as if to the most beautiful music imaginable. Again, no bodies were ever recovered. The pattern repeated throughout Europe with alarming frequency. Lostwithiel, Cornwall in 1468, Ebermannstadt, Bavaria in 1560, Stavanger, Norway in 1648. Always the same elements: the mysterious musician, the entranced children, the disappearances, always separated by multiples of 92 years. Modern historians dismiss these accounts as metaphorical references to disease outbreaks, children's crusades, or emigration events. Convenient explanations, safe explanations, wrong explanations. In 1924, the small mining town of Anvil Mountain, Colorado, experienced what local newspapers described as a mass hallucination when 34 children walked into an abandoned mine shaft following what witnesses described as a tall man playing a silver flute. Search parties found no trace of the children or the mysterious musician. The mine shaft extended only 40 feet before ending in solid rock. No side tunnels, no hidden chambers. The children had vanished into solid stone. The federal government quarantined the town for 6 weeks under the guise of a typhoid outbreak. When residents were finally allowed to return, they found the mine entrance had been sealed with concrete and placed under military guard. The official explanation: structural instability. But local resident Eliza Korsgaard managed to photograph 3 pages of a government document left behind in the town's hotel. The document, dated 1 day after the disappearances, referenced sonic anomalies consistent with previous incidents and chronological adherence to the established pattern. Chronological adherence. 1924, exactly 92 years after an incident in New Harmony, Indiana in 1832, where 27 children vanished during a spring festival, which itself was 92 years after 17 children disappeared from a small village outside of Quebec in 1740. The pattern stretches backward and forward with mathematical precision. What's more disturbing is what happens to those who investigate too deeply. Dr. Walter Crampton of Columbia University began researching these incidents in 1968, compiling what he called the Piper Archive, hundreds of similar cases spanning centuries and continents. In 1971, he was committed to a psychiatric hospital after claiming to hear music that exists between frequencies. He died 3 weeks later of an apparent suicide. His research was confiscated by individuals identifying themselves as government archivists. No record of this archive exists in any government repository. British folklorist Margaret Bellamy published Patterns of Disappearance: The Piper Through History in 1984. The first print run of 5,000 copies was recalled due to printing errors. Bellamy insisted her work had been deliberately suppressed and prepared to self-publish her findings. She was found dead in her London apartment 1 month later. Cause of death: heart failure. She was 42 and had no history of cardiac issues. Her manuscripts, notes, and research materials vanished from her locked office. The most compelling evidence comes from the work of acoustic physicist Dr. Chen Wei-Ling, who in 2007 analyzed medieval church bells from regions where Piper incidents had occurred. Her research revealed that these bells produced harmonic overtones at precisely 92 Hz, a frequency below normal human hearing, but within the range audible to children. Dr. Wei-Ling theorized that these specific frequencies might create what she called neural entrainment pathways that could be exploited by other sounds within similar harmonic ranges. In 2008, Dr. Wei-Ling's laboratory at MIT suffered a catastrophic fire that destroyed her research. The university's official statement cited an electrical malfunction. Dr. Wei-Ling survived but suffered severe damage to her auditory nerves, leaving her permanently deaf. She abandoned her research and refused all interviews. When approached by independent researchers in 2016, she wrote a single message on a notepad: "Some music is not meant to be studied. It studies you back." The mathematical precision of these events cannot be coincidence. Every 92 years, the pattern repeats. The number of victims decreases each time, but the methodology remains identical. A mysterious figure producing inaudible music that only children can hear, leading them away to vanish without trace. But why 92 years? What significance does this number hold? Ancient Sumerian texts describe a celestial cycle of 92 years during which the doorway between spheres briefly opens. The Mayan Dresden Codex contains references to a 92-year period when the thin places between worlds become navigable. These civilizations, separated by time and geography, somehow identified the same temporal pattern we see in the Piper incidents. What's most alarming is that we're approaching another convergence point. The last documented Piper incident occurred in 2016 in the remote village of Vanavara, Siberia, where 7 children wandered into the surrounding forest, following what witnesses described as a tall figure carrying a wooden instrument. Russian authorities classified the incident as a bear attack, despite finding no bodies, no blood, and no evidence of animal presence. Satellite imagery from that day shows a peculiar atmospheric disturbance over the exact location, a spiral pattern of clouds that meteorologists cannot explain. If the pattern holds true, we should expect another incident in 2108, but the cycle appears to be accelerating. In December 2022, 3 children disappeared from a playground in Henderson, Nevada. Security camera footage shows them suddenly stopping their play, turning their heads in unison toward something off-camera, and walking away in perfect synchronization. The footage cuts out for exactly 92 seconds. When it resumes, the children are gone. Police found no evidence of abduction, no signs of struggle, no footprints beyond the playground's boundary. The case remains unsolved. Parents reported that in the days before their disappearance, all 3 children had drawn nearly identical pictures in school. A tall, thin figure holding what appeared to be a flute, surrounded by concentric circles. When asked about the drawings, each child gave the same response. The music man who lives in the walls. Their teachers thought nothing of it. Children have imaginary friends. Children make up stories. But children also hear frequencies adults cannot. The human ear gradually loses its ability to perceive higher frequencies with age. By adulthood, most humans cannot hear sounds above 17,000 hertz. Children, however, can often perceive sounds up to 25,000 hertz. What if the piper's music exists in precisely this range, audible to children but imperceptible to adults? Folklorist Dr. Hannah Michaels proposed what she called the frequency theory in her 2014 paper, published in the Journal of Folklore Research. She suggested that the Piper legend represented an actual phenomenon involving sound frequencies that affect the developing brains of children. Her paper was retracted 3 months after publication. The journal cited methodological concerns, but released no specific criticisms of her research. Dr. Michaels' university email went dark. Her social media accounts were deleted. According to former colleagues, she took a leave of absence and has not returned to academia. What's particularly disturbing about Dr. Michaels' research was her analysis of common elements across centuries of Piper incidents. In 86% of documented cases, witnesses described the children as having empty eyes or vacant expressions. In 72% of cases, survivors or witnesses reported hearing buzzing or humming that became painful shortly before the children were led away. And in every single case where the mysterious figure was described, witnesses noted unnaturally long fingers and fluid movement like water flowing uphill, the same description, from witnesses separated by centuries, by oceans, by language and culture. In 2015, neurologist Dr. Raymond Carter conducted a study using EEG monitoring of children exposed to various sound frequencies. At precisely 22,635 hertz, a frequency inaudible to the adult researchers but within range of the children's hearing, all subjects showed an unusual pattern of brain activity. Synchronized theta waves across the temporal lobes combined with suppressed activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and critical thinking. In effect, the children entered a highly suggestible state while appearing normal to observers. Dr. Carter's research was never published. His funding was abruptly terminated by the National Science Foundation, citing ethical concerns. When independent researchers attempted to replicate his work, they found that all electronic equipment failed when generating this specific frequency. Every time, without exception, digital recorders captured only static. Measuring equipment registered nothing, as if something was actively preventing documentation of this particular sound. Think about that. A specific frequency that cannot be recorded, that affects only developing brains, that appears throughout history in conjunction with mass disappearances. The rational explanation would be mass hysteria, collective delusion, or elaborated mythology. But mass hysteria doesn't leave behind identical drawings made by children who never met. Collective delusion doesn't explain archaeological findings classified by governments. Mythology doesn't predict the future with mathematical precision. What if the Pied Piper isn't a person, but a phenomenon? Or worse, what if it's both? Ancient cultures worldwide have legends of entities that exist at the threshold of human perception. The Anasazi spoke of hollow people who could only be perceived through peripheral vision. Norse mythology describes the Hulderfolk who existed alongside humans but could only be seen by children and those near death. Celtic folklore warns of the gentry, beings who could entrance humans with music and lead them into realms from which they never returned. Different names, same entity. The most disturbing theory comes from theoretical physicist Dr. Anton Velikov, who in 2018 proposed what he called dimensional resonance hypothesis. He suggested that certain frequencies might create vibrations that align with what string theory describes as membrane boundaries between dimensional planes. In layman's terms, specific sounds might temporarily thin the barriers between our reality and others, allowing passage or extraction from one to another. Dr. Velikov disappeared while hiking alone in the Ural Mountains in 2019. Search parties found only his recording equipment, which contained nothing but 92 seconds of what audio analysts described as digital silence, not the absence of sound, but rather the deliberate erasure of whatever had been recorded. Consider this. What if the piper isn't taking children away? What if something on the other side is pulling them through, using sound as a bridge, using children because their brains can still perceive the frequencies needed to create that bridge? Throughout history, we've rationalized these events. We've created comforting explanations, folktales that end with morals about paying debts, stories that give meaning to the incomprehensible, because the alternative is too frightening to contemplate. But the pattern continues regardless of our explanations. In 2023, acoustic monitoring stations around the world detected an anomalous sound event lasting precisely 92 seconds. The frequency was determined to be approximately 22,630 hertz, almost exactly matching Dr. Carter's findings. No natural or man-made phenomenon could explain it. More disturbing still, the signal appeared to originate from multiple locations simultaneously, as if it existed everywhere at once. 3 days later, reports emerged of children in scattered locations around the globe: Singapore, Buenos Aires, Vancouver, Lagos, Prague, suddenly stopping whatever they were doing, tilting their heads as if listening, and asking adults, "Do you hear the music?" In each case, the adults heard nothing. No children disappeared that day. But something changed. Something awakened. Analysis of global birth records reveals another disturbing pattern. Every 92 years, there's a statistically significant spike in children born with a rare auditory condition called hyperacusis, abnormally acute hearing, particularly in the upper frequency ranges. The most recent spike began in 2016 and continues today. These children can hear what we cannot. They're listening. But to what? Researchers working independently have noted that children's television programming, online content, and even certain educational applications now contain embedded tones at the upper ranges of human hearing, frequencies that only children can perceive. When analyzed, these tones form patterns that create what musicologists call preparatory sequences, notes that condition the listener to anticipate and respond to specific melodic progressions. It's as if something is tuning children's brains, preparing them, making them receptive. For what? For when? According to the pattern, the next major Piper event should occur in 2108. But the Henderson disappearances suggest the cycle is accelerating. The global acoustic event indicates something is changing. The preparatory frequencies hidden in children's media suggest something is preparing. The story you were told as a child of a colorful piper leading rats and then children away is a sanitized version of a much darker truth. The earliest manuscripts don't mention rats at all. The rats were added in the 16th century, an attempt to make sense of the inexplicable. The earliest versions simply state that the piper came, played music only the children could hear, and led them away to a fate unknown. No explanation, no rats, no moral lesson about paying debts, just children following music adults couldn't hear, vanishing without trace. And now, as you read this, children across the world are hearing frequencies you cannot perceive, drawing pictures of a figure they've never seen but somehow know, asking adults if they can hear music that doesn't exist, or rather, doesn't exist in our audible spectrum. The next time a child asks you, "Do you hear that music?" remember the pattern. Remember the disappearances. Remember that for centuries, we've been telling ourselves comforting stories about what really happens when the piper plays. You might think this is just another tale, another creepy story meant to unsettle you briefly before you return to your comfortable reality. You might dismiss the dates, the frequencies, the disappearances as elaborate fiction. Ask yourself this: if a phenomenon existed that used sound inaudible to adults to influence and abduct children, how would we know? What evidence would remain? What patterns would emerge over centuries? Exactly the patterns we see. The most terrifying aspect isn't that children have been disappearing for centuries. It's not even that these disappearances follow a mathematical pattern that continues today. The most terrifying aspect is that right now, all around you, frequencies are playing that you cannot hear. But the children in your life can. They're listening. They're being prepared. And the cycle is accelerating. In writing this, I've likely attracted attention from those who work to keep this information suppressed. Historical accounts vanish from archives. Researchers disappear. Evidence is destroyed. The pattern of suppression is as consistent as the pattern of disappearances. But you need to know. Because we're approaching another convergence point, because your children might be listening to frequencies you cannot hear, because the next time they stop suddenly and tilt their heads as if listening to something beyond your perception, it might not be their imagination. It might be the piper. It might be the music that has been calling children for centuries. It might be the beginning of the next disappearance. Listen carefully to what your children say. Watch for the signs: sudden interest in music, drawings of tall figures playing instruments, complaints about hearing sounds that don't stop, sleep disturbances at precisely 92 minutes past midnight. These patterns have preceded every documented piper event throughout history. The music is playing again. We just can't hear it. But they can. And somewhere, in between frequencies, in the spaces between what we can perceive and what we cannot, something is waiting. Something that has been taking children for centuries. Something that knows exactly when and how to call them. Something that might be calling right now. Listen carefully. Not for what you can hear, but for what you cannot. For the music in between frequencies. For the piper who has been playing the same song for centuries. The children already hear it. The question is, what will you do when they start to follow? If you've read this far, you're now part of the pattern. You're aware. That awareness might protect those around you, or it might make you a target. Those who investigate the piper too deeply tend to disappear or meet unfortunate ends. But knowledge shared is harder to suppress than knowledge isolated. Tell others what you've learned here. Watch for the signs. Listen when children speak of music you cannot hear. Because the next piper event is coming. The cycle continues. And this time, we might be able to stop it if enough of us are watching, if enough of us are listening for what we cannot hear. The music is playing. The children are listening. Are you?